right, great job, Sharon. Thank you so much. Our next presentation involves California to the Philippines. Our next presenter is Kelly White, and the project is Net Zero Initiatives in the province of Bataan, Philippines. Is nuclear feasible? Kelly, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here. My name is Kelly White, and this is my capstone titled Balance and Growth, Evaluating Nuclear Power and Net Zero Initiatives in the Province of Bataan, Philippines. So starting with an overview, this project's going to go through some background, why I chose Bataan specifically, some research questions I aim to answer, methods, results, possible outcomes and recommendations, and then a conclusion. So to start with some background, the Philippines is a nation made up of thousands of islands, and as an island nation, this means they're increasingly susceptible to different impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, increasing temperatures, and more frequent typhoons, and those are just a few. In addition, the country is experiencing rapid economic growth, as seen in this figure. The Philippines was the second fastest among its Asian neighbors in GDP growth, and in turn, this leads to increasing energy demands. Currently, the country is relying a lot on traditional energy sources like coal and natural gas, and even having to import some of these sources in order to meet their current demands. At the same time, the country has increased their interest in diversifying their energy profile through different renewable options in order to stray away from these traditional sources. And the country is currently deciding on how to reach a balance between this rapid economic development and energy demand, and also sustainability as they develop. So this in turn is leading them to renewing their interest in nuclear and renewable energy. So now zooming into the province of Bataan, Philippines. Oh, can you see it? Okay, so a province located just a 2-hour drive from Manila, the capital city. Bataan is a rapidly growing economic hub for the country. As a peninsula, its significance stems from many factors, including its rapidly growing industrial export zone, its growing population, and specifically the fact that it is home to a fully completed nuclear power plant that has actually never been turned on. Despite it being completed in the 1980s and being commissioned by former President Marcos Sr., it has actually never been operational. After a new president took office after President Marcos and the infamous incident of Chernobyl, safety concerns led to the ultimate decision of not utilizing the power plant. Since then, it has just been in preservation mode, being maintained but not utilized. However, currently, the president of the Philippines is Marcos Sr.'s son, Marcos Jr., and so discussions about its possible reopening have definitely become more prevalent in recent years. And so with that being said, this project aims to answer a few different questions, including what are the current net zero initiatives in Bataan, Philippines? How do different stakeholders and local community members feel concerning the possible reopening of the plant? Are equitable net zero initiatives feasible as Bataan rapidly grows and develops? And then, should the power plant reopen? So, over 3 weeks of research in the Philippines, I conducted 11 interviews, visited some different relevant sites, including the nuclear power plant itself, and then ultimately transcribed approximately 145 minutes of interviews and conducted a feasibility analysis to figure out where they should go next. So beginning with my research at the provincial government building, I started at the Bataan Provincial Capitol building, also known as the Bunker, with a very informative presentation that was given to me, describing the various renewable energy initiatives currently going on in the province. They mentioned things like solar panels on government buildings. They have 3 solar farms, all privately owned, and the potential of wind energy after more feasibility studies. But they also mentioned that they really rely on private investment in their projects, and they also described a few challenges that they deal with as a province. So the first being the fact that coal plants are actually a strong partner with the provincial government, so that kind of creates a complicated relationship with them wanting to stray away from these fossil fuels while still maintaining a mutual enough relationship to have that financial support from them. In addition, they mentioned that since they're such a small province, they have limited land area. And so 42% of the land is already designated as protected land, so they can't build any infrastructure there, which leaves 58% left, and that is often already taken up by agricultural use, housing, and any other infrastructure that's already settled there. So in addition, they mentioned that reliance on public and private partnership, which can be beneficial, but it does lead them to difficulties establishing new infrastructure on their own and independently. And then I also asked if they had any concern in terms of any concerns that they wish would be addressed specifically with them and the national government. And they just mentioned that they think everyone would benefit from increased communication, especially between the different government levels, but also from the national government to the provincial government and also just to the citizens. And they mentioned that the reason they have such strong ties with their private investors and partners is because they have strong communication and transparency, and so they wish they would get that in return from the national government. And one quote I thought was very impactful from the interviews was from Rafael De Leon, an assistant department head at the Environment and Natural Resources Office, and he mentioned that the community's biggest complaints are respiratory diseases from the air pollution and emissions from the local coal plants. So this really shows why they're so invested in renewable energy and straying away from traditional forms, because people are really concerned about air quality here. And one thing that was interesting was, despite being very eager for energy diversification, the officials unanimously opposed the reopening of the BNPP, which is what I'm going to be calling the Bataan National Power Plant from now on. They mentioned the fact that when it was sited at the current location in Morong Bay, it was completely different than what it's like now. Now it's a really bustling tourist hub, and they get a lot of revenue from that area, and there's just a large population there, and that's not what it was like in the 70s when they chose that location. And so they fear that opening that plant could affect their tourism economy, and then also pointed to the fact that energy generated from the power plant might not be directly directed to Bataan residents, and so they might be facing risk without reward. So those were some of their concerns, and instead they proposed an alternative recommendation, which hasn't been officially proposed, but their idea was converting the power plant into a mixed-use cloud computing data hub and leisure and entertainment resort. So this would keep the current infrastructure and allow them to develop on it, but would reduce that risk that a lot of the public is fearing. So afterwards, I also conducted interviews at the BNPP itself. I did a pretty thorough full site tour where I was given access to the entire inside of the plant, which was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that was really interesting. And I wasn't allowed to take photos or videos, but it gave me a very clear representation of what the inside looks like currently and the condition it's in, considering it's been sitting there for like 40 years. And then the interviews at the plant were with National Power Corporation employees. It was with 3 of them, and they are responsible for maintaining the plant, but they have no say ultimately on if it reopens or what goes on. They're just hired to take care of it and preserve it. But they do provide like some lectures about nuclear power to visitors who are interested. And yeah, so interviewees heavily emphasize the entire time about the safety of the plant, how there's constantly feasibility studies being done, and they're saying that the plant is good to go and good as new. They also elaborated on the fact that many things like nuclear waste, which I specifically asked about, would have to be confirmed and addressed prior to reopening the plant. And they mentioned that there's a lot of regulations that go into legally operating the plant that will be addressed, which the public doesn't seem to know about. They also mentioned that the final decision is ultimately up to the national government, but they are hopeful that the reopening will lead to more jobs and a successful inclusion of nuclear energy into the energy profile of the Philippines. So they are definitely very much for it. The main point being made by all of them was that in media, the plant is really portrayed as dangerous and risky, when in reality, as people that work there constantly and know a lot more about nuclear than the public, it's actually very safe and feasible. So these are a couple of the quotes. And their main quote that was posted all in the walls of the visitor center and that they kept repeating to me was, "Learn the facts and discover the truth about nuclear energy." So ultimately, they agreed that the plant should operate. And this is their 19 key area plan that they showed as well, showing that they have a lot of preparation. And so afterwards, I also interviewed a small sample of community members in Bataan. Most of them had been living there their entire lives, ranging from ages 21 to 46, which provides them with an important perspective concerning the rapid growth that has occurred. Main takeaways included the fact that everyone pretty much recognized that decreases in air quality were happening, and the fact that renewable energy could fix that and reduce costs of energy. However, most of them, actually all of them, did not utilize renewable energy on an individual scale, so no one had electric cars, no one had solar panels, and that was just because they said it was too expensive. It didn't seem like they weren't interested, it just seemed like there was a lack of accessibility to that. And then in terms of reopening the plant, all of the interviewees did not support the reopening. But it is important to note that their knowledge of the plant was really limited. It stemmed from talking about the opening of the plant in their history class a bit and just negative depictions in media and on the news. However, they didn't seem to know very much about what nuclear is and how it can potentially be a viable option. So after compiling all my research, I've come up with two options for the next steps. The first being that the plant does open. The Philippines is in a really unique situation with a completely operational nuclear power plant that's already constructed, which is just very unique. No one else has this. And they have a strong advantage in terms of expanding and diversifying their energy sector without having to require more land and infrastructure investment, which is two of the main concerns of the province. However, with this decision, there's a couple conditions that would have to be met in order to ensure that this is an equitable decision. These conditions include energy being directed to Bataan residents and benefiting them initially and mainly, and so that would ultimately be up to whatever company or the national government, but it's important that energy gets directed to Bataan in order to provide them with the benefits of nuclear power if they're dealing with risks. And in addition, regardless of being in the Philippines or not, people should be the priority when deciding where to put nuclear waste. I know this is going to be a decision that has to be made prior to the reopening, but again, even if nuclear waste isn't placed in the Philippines, it's important that we keep in mind how it's going to impact populations. And then, in addition, possible compensation if tourism locations and businesses suffer from the plant's reopening. Although the risk is not large, people might not know that, and it might take a blow to their tourism economy in the area as people view it as something dangerous and scary. And so I think compensation to local businesses or providing them with jobs would be beneficial. And then also just increased public education in order to gain a social license to operate. I think all of the public fear to the nuclear power plant opening just comes from miseducation and a lack of. And so I think increasing that and having communicative transparency will help reduce that public fear and it's often imperative to successful sustainable development to have public approval. So another option is converting the hub to the data hub, which was the provincial government's idea. This could be beneficial to the country and province as it can provide a technological advantage to the country, which is really important in times like this. This decision would also lead to less impacts on tourism, less public opposition, and potentially new jobs. But for conditions for this to be an equitable decision would include still progressing towards energy diversification goals in other ways, and also committing to powering this hub with renewable energy sources to not create excess stress on the grid. And then also, it would be beneficial if jobs at this hub were localized, and possibly if they provided specialized job training to increase local residents as employees. So in conclusion, equitable renewable energy diversification and development is feasible in Bataan, Philippines. In order to ensure success, there needs to be collaboration between all levels of government and the public. Public education concerning the climate crisis and potential benefits of nuclear energy needs to be expanded, and more national support for provincial government projects with clear communication is essential. And so I'd like to thank my capstone committee, including my chair, Dr. Corey Gabriel, Jeremy Martin, and Dr. Caroline Collins for their help and contributions to this project. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the Julia R. Brown Fund. I would not have been able to conduct the research that I did without your contributions. And a thank you to my family and friends and cohort and everyone. So thank you.
That was super interesting. I'm curious, if the plant were to start producing nuclear energy, how much of the country could that power? Like part of Bataan, all of Bataan, or like beyond that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the specific number, but they did tell me that the provincial government was telling me that when it was built, it was set to provide energy to a large portion of Luzon, which is the main island that Bataan and Manila are on. However, that has reduced like significantly, and so they were worried about like, is it even worth it? Because it's not actually going to be producing as much as their energy demands are needing right now. So I can't remember the specific number, so I don't want to make one up on the top of my head, but they did mention that.